System failure. Picture this: an emergency room's HIPAA compliance completely shattered by a rogue diagnostic algorithm, or Wall Street trading floor suddenly violating the Equal Credit Opportunity Act because of a biased machine learning model. How about a manufacturing factory triggering a massive OSHA investigation after an autonomous system just goes completely off script? So, what do all these catastrophic events have in common? Well, they happen when organizations take generalist AI frameworks and deploy them into high-stakes, highly regulated environments. The generic checklists, they just didn't hold the line.
Welcome to This Explainer. I am so glad you're here because today we are aggressively framing a core thesis that is literally shaking up the tech world. We're talking about why deep domain specialization beats general AI governance every single time. Look, if you want to survive the next decade of artificial intelligence, generalized knowledge, it's just no longer enough. Deep domain specialization is the absolute only path forward. Okay, let's dive right into this.
Part 1, generalist frameworks fail.
Which brings us to Part 2, the architecture of governance. All right, let's step into the war room for a second. Right now, we are seeing a massive boom in AI governance education, which is great, but there is a fatal structural flaw here. They're teaching it as a uniform discipline. It's like they're pretending that a hospital, a commercial bank, and a logistics company all face the exact same risks. But the specific type of business you're running completely dictates the architecture you have to build. I mean, just look at the sheer scale of the regulatory battlefields we're dealing with. If you deploy AI in healthcare, you're suddenly wrestling with HIPAA privacy laws, FDA medical device classifications, and CLIA lab standards. In finance, you're up against the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the ECOA, and CFPB guidelines. Legal aid has state bar ethics, education has FERPA. A generalist professional absolutely cannot master all of these defensive fronts at once. There's just no way.
And this is exactly why generic risk templates fail. We're looking at wildly different risk profiles. In healthcare, the risk is kinetic and, frankly, potentially lethal. An incorrect diagnostic suggestion can literally cost a patient their life. But over in finance, the risk is systemic. A biased algorithm might systematically discriminate against thousands of loan applicants, causing massive consumer financial harm. You cannot govern a lethal physical threat the exact same way you govern a systemic financial threat. It's comparing apples to hand grenades. Moving on to Part 3, the fallacy of universal frameworks.
Okay, we need to dismantle a prevailing myth right now. Proponents of generalized training love to point to universal standards, like the NIST AI Risk Management Framework or ISO 42001, and say, hey, these apply to everyone. But relying on them alone is a massive trap. Think of those universal frameworks as just a skeleton. Sure, they provide a logical structure, map, measure, manage, or plan, do, check, act. But a skeleton can't move on its own, right? It needs the organism. Specialized operational knowledge provides the domain-specific muscle, the nerve endings, and the localized skin that actually breathes functional life into that skeleton. Without the specialist's deep knowledge, the framework is really just an empty binder gathering dust on a desk. Let's get specific in Part 4, tactical breakdown in healthcare. Just notice the stark difference when we assess a real-world use case, like an AI-powered clinical documentation tool. You know, software that listens to a doctor-patient conversation and automatically generates chart notes. For data privacy, a generalist is going to flag standard privacy concerns. But the healthcare specialist, they're going to flag that this AI might actually be classified by the FDA as a literal medical device. For algorithmic bias, the generalist just notes generic bias identification, but the specialist knows the real landmine. If that AI generates inaccurate medical codes, the hospital could face massive federal exposure under the False Claims Act for fraudulent billing. The generalist barely even scratched the surface, while the specialist identified the actual legal landmines waiting to explode. Continuing this tactical autopsy into accuracy and human oversight. A generalist looks at accuracy and simply says, well, the AI needs to be correct. The specialist says, actually, it specifically needs ONC certification to legally integrate with our electronic health records. For human oversight, the generalist says, just keep a human in the loop. But the specialist warns, if this AI generates clinically significant errors and the doctor doesn't catch them, we are staring down the barrel of catastrophic clinical malpractice liability. Missing these specialized nuances doesn't just mean you fail an audit, it means a lethal, catastrophic organizational failure. So how do we fix this? Part 5, the specialization pathway. If generalization fails, how do you adapt? Well, the market is completely desperate for people who can walk into a highly regulated building and start speaking their language from day one. To become that specialized operational asset, you need 3 essential pillars of domain depth: Step 1, you have to infiltrate the regulatory landscape of your chosen sector. You need to know the statutes and agency guidance cold. Step 2, map the industry standards. Know the exact accreditation bodies that actually grade the businesses in your sector. And step 3, master the operational realities. You have to understand who actually holds the decision-making authority. You need to know how the shadow shifts operate in a hospital, or how risk committees actually vote in a credit union. And once you have that knowledge, you've got to build what we call the artifact forge. You cannot just walk in and bring high-level theory to your stakeholders anymore. You need a field-tested portfolio of actual governance artifacts. We're talking domain-specific risk templates, hyper-specialized sector policies, exhaustive technical audit checklists, and highly targeted stakeholder communication plans. These artifacts, they are your calling card. They prove you don't just know the theory, you know exactly how to execute it in their specific environment. Which brings us to our final section, Part 6, Relevance or Obsolescence. Listen closely, because the AI governance job market is rapidly bifurcating. If you are sitting on generalized governance knowledge, your skill set is becoming highly commoditized and fast. You are standing at a major crossroads. Generalized frameworks are currently being productized into automated software tools as we speak. Soon, automated GovBot swarms will execute general NIST or ISO checklists for a fraction of the cost of a human consultant. If your entire value proposition is, I can apply the NIST framework to any organization, a software program is literally going to replace you. The survivors of this shift? They'll be the specialist fleet commanders, the humans who can navigate the incredibly complex, contradictory, and localized rules of specific sectors that software simply cannot interpret. And hey, if you doubt that, just look at the incoming regulatory tsunami heading our way. The EU AI Act has incredibly strict sector-specific rules. California state laws are hyper-targeted. Federal agencies like the FDA, the CFPB, and the EEOC are dropping massive domain-specific guidance for AI deployment. Organizations absolutely do not have the time to hire a generalist and wait for them to learn the industry on the job. They need immediate domain-level defensive capabilities right now, today. This brings us to your ultimate armor against professional substitution. As our source material points out so perfectly, a generalist can be substituted by another generalist with similar credentials. A specialist cannot. That right there is the kill shot argument for market survival. Deep specialization isn't just about doing the job better. It is a sustainable competitive advantage. It makes you incredibly rare, highly valuable, and completely impossible to replace with a generic piece of compliance software. Which leaves us here. The choice. As the source material powerfully states, the choice is not between breadth and depth, it is between relevance and obsolescence. So are you going to be the generalist who gets automated out of existence by a simple checklist software? Or are you going to put in the disciplined work to master a domain, build your artifact forge, and become the absolutely indispensable specialist that these high-stakes organizations are desperately looking for? Think about what sector calls to you and start taking deep today. What will your specialty be?